Hello and welcome everyone. Today's video is part of a longer series at looking at different Eurorack sequencers, and today's video is all about the Endorphin.es Ground Control. This is not a feature-by-feature in-depth manual, but I'm more looking at standout features, workflow, and musical examples. I'm really interested in how the design choices when making complex Eurorack modules changes how we approach making music and the sonic results. Here's what's to come. So this is the ground control. The ground control first became available in 2022 and sets itself apart by its fully playable and recordable 2-octave keyboard. Sequences can be programmed using a 101 style step input method, as well as XOX style drum editing, which you will see shortly. The ground control also features Polyrhythm, which is quite rare for a sequencer, but more on that later. The ground control has 3 CV and gate outputs for melodic sequences, as well as 8 drum outs and 1 mod output. The sequencer can do glides, ties, rests, ratchets, arpeggiation, transposition, shuffle, has preset and custom scales, as well as 4 CV inputs that can control a number of performance parameters. For the first part of the video, I've set up a small system that makes use of all of ground control's outputs. For drums, I'm using the Queen of Pentacles. My bassline consists of 2 Godspeeds going into a 100 grid, controlled by a Quadergy envelope generator. My second voice is provided by a Taiga semi-modular synthesizer. And my third voice is an ensemble oscillator into a Ghost for a bit of a different sound. So let's get started with some actual drum sequencing. If I select the drum sequencer and long press the record button, I get into the XOX style pattern sequencer. If I additionally press the play button, we can now see how the 16 steps of the sequencer are laid out throughout the keyboard. As you can see, the bottom row has 14 steps, and the second and 15th step of the sequence are the first and last button on the top row. All the other buttons on the top row will select your different drums, and once you select your drums, you can use the step sequencer to punch in your pattern. Each drum lane can have its own pattern length, and you can also add ratchets on each step if you want, although the amount of ratchets is set globally. If you long press the recording button while one of the melodic tracks is selected, you open up the step sequencer mode. In this mode, the tempo button adds rests, and with the 2-octave keyboard, you can program your CV and gate outputs on a per step basis. Lastly, if you press record while the sequencer is running, everything you do will be recorded, quantized, and played back live. So just to give you a quick example, here's a short melody. Two things that I'm not showing here but that I quite enjoy are that if you are live recording and you're holding the last note while playing a new note, the sequencer will add a glide between the notes, which is a very intuitive way of adding glides. Additionally, it's quite fast to delete patterns while you record, so you can test out your ideas and go through different iterations quite quickly. Another way to create sequences on the ground control is to use the arpeggiator mode. And so if you are on any of the melodic tracks, you can press any of the 4 arpeggiator buttons to create an arpeggio that goes up, down, random, or in the order of notes pressed. If you press last step, it will latch the notes and keep playing even if you lift your hands. Holding the arpeggiator button and pressing plus or minus will add additional notes identical to the ones you've already added, just up to 2 octaves above or below. And long pressing last step will enable so-called super latch, which means that pressing new notes will add them to the sequence and not override the notes that you've already played. When I work with the ground control, I mostly use the arpeggiator, the live recording, and the XOX style sequencer to get my ideas down quickly. But since the latest update, you can also use a couple of different generative functions to generate different rhythms or melodies on the fly. I've actually worked a little bit longer on this pattern, so let me show you the final result. Next, let's talk about polyrhythm and polymeter, as they're often confused for one another. For a beat to be considered polymetric, the drum hits on the different drum voices are aligned on the beat grid, but the downbeats are not aligned, which results in these shifting beat patterns that you may have come across before if you've worked with, say, Euclidean sequencers. In the example that you will hear shortly, I set up the kick on the ground control to be repeated every 4 steps, whereas I've set the step length of the hi-hat to be 3 steps, so it's repeating at a different interval, resulting in the most basic polymeter. On the ground control, you can set the number of steps individually for each of the 8 drum voices and 3 melodic voices on a per pattern basis, which makes it possible to create many different polymetric sequences that change over time as you change your patterns. Lastly, let's talk about polyrhythm. Polyrhythm means that different rhythms are playing at the same time. This is normally achieved by different instruments having different time signatures. So one instrument could be at a 4/4 time signature, while another is at a 3/4 or a 6/8. And so while for a polymeter, the step length for each instrument is the same and the downbeat differs, for polyrhythm, the downbeat for each instrument is the same, but the step length will differ. So here's a quick example. Listen to how the step length of the bass line will change compared to the kick drum, depending on the time signature used. I believe that the ground control is one of the few sequencers that has this feature, but note that you can only set one time signature for all drum tracks, as well as each of the melodic tracks individually. So in total you can have 4 different time signatures playing at the same time. Just like for the step length, you can set the time signature for each pattern you make individually, and so by chaining different patterns, you can also chain different time signatures, which can lead to really interesting rhythmic results. Alright, with this high-level overview out of the way, let's check out some typical sequences that you may get out of the ground control. So for the first practical example, let's have a listen to the bass line and the hi-hats. Both patterns are only 16 steps long, but by using a couple of different probability functions, we can make it so the pattern never quite repeats the same way. For the open and closed hi-hats, all I had to do was set the probability of triggering to about 60%, and so it changes every time the pattern repeats. For the bass line, which I've generated using the random generation function of the ground control, I've also set the probability of triggering to about 90%. But more importantly, the sequencer is not running forwards, but I've set it 2-step random, which means that at every step it has a chance to go 1 step forwards or 1 step backwards, resulting in really interesting melodic sequences. As you may have noticed, I'm really fond of the polyrhythm feature of the ground control, and so in my drum pattern here, pattern A is only 28 steps long, and to get to those 32 steps, I'm using pattern B or pattern C chained to pattern A, but pattern B and pattern C are in different time signatures, giving a bit of a special touch to my drum sequence. And just as an add-on to the last sequence, I was experimenting with playing live while having the sequencer in random step mode. This means that whatever melody I put in will never come out the same way, but will still somewhat resemble my original intention, just remade in unexpected ways. Here an example of how I make the majority of my music. I normally have a fairly simple sequence running on my sequencers that just gives me the right aesthetic that I like. Then I start to improvise using joysticks or other haptic interfaces, collecting interesting gestures and textures for my music. I found that the ground control complemented that style of working quite well, as you get your sequences down quite quickly, and the 2-octave keyboard helps with experimenting with different melodies on the fly. So let's talk about the pros and cons. When it comes to the pros, when working with the ground control, I really enjoyed the immediacy of the keyboard, including the implementation of the glide feature. From all the fully featured sequencers I've used until now, this is easily the most immediate when it comes to live recording. Having both live recording and the XOX style sequencer means that programming sequences is quite fast and easy. The standout feature of the ground control is of course its implementation of Polyrhythm, and I really enjoyed that different patterns can have different time signatures, helping you to create really rhythmically intricate patterns if that's what you want. Overall, the ground control strikes a great balance between playability and complexity, with a stronger focus on playability. When it comes to the cons, I wish the ground control had more mod outputs and an easier way to program these mod outputs. Adding a molecular voltage block, Shakmat Medusa or similar to the setup is an easy fix, but of course at a cost. There's a small learning curve to the module, as I found not all button combos are intuitive or labeled on the faceplate, but for a fully featured sequencer the amount of button combos you have to learn is manageable. And the manual comes with a shortcut sheet to help you get started. Also, the ground control has no way of programming micro tunings or micro timings, if that's something you're looking for. Alright, so here are the final ratings. As already mentioned, this video is part of a longer series where I'm reviewing different types of sequencers, so if you want to see more of this type of content, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.